and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. Now, I have a bit of a problem. So a lot of the work I do here either consists of like fire or grinding metal or all other manner of activity that makes me just destroy my clothing. I swear I have like 2 shirts total that don't have burn holes in it. And while I do enjoy the whole mad artificer aesthetic, I think to the general public I just kind of look derelict and unkempt. I mean, even this one, look at all the little holes. It's like a brand new shirt. So in an attempt to remedy this, I've decided to make myself a shop apron. Now, of course, I can't just make a regular old apron. Where's the fun in that? So while brainstorming with my community members and Middle Miss Fred, we came up with this little number right here. It has this dope fantasy design that I dig so much on this channel. Oh, speaking of channels, before I jump into the project, I want to remind y'all that the Skill Tree family now has 2 new channels. College of Lore here is for all things D&D, and Let Me Tell You a Story is exactly that. We kind of tell you a story with an animated background. Anyways, they're fun to make, and I really hope you like them. It would mean the world to me if you'd pop on over and check them out to support them. Link in the description below. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's level up this skill. Okay, so right off the bat, I have a bit of a conundrum with this whole apron project. Until now, I've only really known of 2 different types of leather. There's veg tan and chrome tan. Veg tan's cool because I can dye it and I can tool it and make it exactly what I want, but for this application, it's really stiff. Meanwhile, chrome tan feels a lot more loose like fabric and will be comfortable to wear, but I can't tool it, I can't dye it, it just kind of is what it is when I get it. Now, I addressed this issue with my local Tandy leather employee, and they pointed me towards this beautiful product. This stuff is milled veg tan leather. It's supple and drapey like chrome tan leather, but you can still tool it and dye it and do all that custom stuff you could normally do with veg tan. It is the literal center of those 2 things, taking the best of both worlds into one product, and I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so to get the general shape of my apron, I end up using this fabric one that I've had for years and used for painting or whatever. If you don't have one of these already, you can use any cheap piece of fabric. Even if you didn't want to cut it, you could probably just pin it up into position. Though I think cheapo aprons like that are like, I don't know, $4 or $5 at Michael's or Home Depot, so what's your time worth, I guess. So anyways, using that as a guide, I traced the shape onto my leather using an awl. This is a pretty new technique for me. Usually I'm putting it in with pen or marker, but this way is far superior because if you mess up, it just leaves a little scratch that you don't even notice as opposed to like an ink stain from your pen or marker. And it's still completely visible and easy to follow. And follow it I did with a nice sharp razor knife. This stuff cuts like butter. Such a pleasure to use this product. Tandy, I want to dislike you because you're not sponsoring me, but damn it, you carry good stuff. Now, I did end up leaving the bottom edge just as is because I like that kind of rough feeling at the bottom. The vibe I'm going for is like an artificer who doesn't have the time to care about things being neat because he's inventing things and all that. So yeah, that cool rough edge adds a little bit of grunge to the whole thing. And once cut out and put into position, I really love the fit. It's an apron. It fits like an apron. It's perfect. I also went ahead and cut my pocket squares at this time too. All right, so as we see in the picture here, there's a lot of cool green detail with like the tree in the middle of the chest and the trim and all that jazz. Now to get that image, I could have printed it off in multiple sheets of paper and just kind of taped them together, but you know, have Cricut printer will use. So I just had to draw 1/2 of the design on my paper here. 1/2 because the printing sheet's only so wide, but the whole thing is mirrored. So to get it into the physical world, I could just trace it through some wax paper, turning it over so I mirror both sides. Now for all these details and stuff, I'm actually going to be using some regular 4-ounce veg tan leather, just because there's a lot of fiddly little details in there, and I'm afraid with the softer stuff, it won't stay into position as easily as it will with the stiffer stuff. So after cutting the leather to size, I wet it down and used a stylus to transfer my image onto the leather, then proceeded to cut it out with a sharp razor knife. Now going back to that image again, you're gonna see there's a lot of this like trim that goes all around the outside of it. To get that right, I just laid down my apron material on top of that leather and then used the awl to scratch the shape in. Then I went back over that line with my wing divider to give myself about 3/4 inch wide mark. This way, when I cut it out, it'll follow the contours of my apron exactly and give me a nice clean looking trim piece. And during this time, I also cut out all the extra little details, like this little strip that's gonna hold this ring in place so I can hang rags and stuff from it, the top of my pockets, and finally the strips of leather that will go around my waist and also down the leg slit. And with all that good to go, I started the standard practice of like beveling all my edges to clean it up. Now at this point, I did run into a small snag that I thought would be kind of cool to go over with you. You see, I never realized that I actually had to sharpen my edge beveler. I mean, upon reflection now, it's obvious. I use it to cut things. It's gonna get dull over time. Of course I have to sharpen it. It's just one of those things I never actually thought of until it started to stick and kind of make the edge jagged looking. So since this is exactly when I learned how to do it, I figured I'd show you how. All right, all I needed for this was 600 grit sandpaper. Now to make sure you have the angle right while you're sharpening it, it helps if you take some Sharpie and just color in the whole back of the beveler. Now once you've taken a few passes, you can see where the ink has been removed and make sure that it's hitting right along that edge so you're actually sharpening with it. So with that angle established, I just did a whole bunch of passes against that sandpaper until I figured it was sharpened enough. Then I added some jeweler's rouge to the backside of some leather just to really polish that blade and hone it in. And this made all the difference in the world. I didn't realize how long I'd been fighting this tool until it was actually sharp again and just kind of cut right through the leather. So yeah, just a little extra technique should your edge beveler start giving you crap. Anyways, with those edges nice and rounded, I went back in with my slicker just to help lay down all those fibers. And here's another little technique that I found really helpful. So with all those little tiny crevices in the tree part, I was having a lot of trouble trying to slick those because my slicker wouldn't fit inside. So to solve this, I went ahead and sanded away this little indent into the back of a paintbrush. Using it, I was able to get into all those little crevices and slick it all down nice and clean. Cool, so with everything prepped and ready, it's time to add some color to it. Now for my green, I decided to use this Kelly green because I really like how deep and rich the color was. Because of the nature of the cutouts and all that though, I kind of was worried of not getting it on evenly, so I decided to use my airbrush to put it in place. To do that though, I definitely recommend thinning it out with some of this dye reducer. Because if you don't, it runs the risk of clogging up the gun and that's such a pain in the ass. Now, if you've never used a dye reducer before, the steps are really easy, but you have to follow them exactly like this. First, pour your dye into half of the bottle, and also all over your table. This part is very important, don't ask why. Now, spend a few moments swearing at yourself as you clean it off your table. Then, fill the other half of your bottle with the dye reducer. Once you've given it a little stir, it's good to go. Again, make sure you follow this step by step. It's the only way to do it correctly. Now the airbrush does a really good job putting things on evenly, but it takes a few coats until I get the green darkness that I want. For the rest of the apron, I'm gonna be able to apply everything directly to it, so that's gonna be a lot easier. Now the color I decided to use for that is this golden brown. And before putting it in place, I decided to wet down all of the leather just to help that dye take more evenly. And then I heavily applied this dye. I wanted the color to be as pure as I can get it, so I really saturated it with dye. Cool, so with everything all colored up, I wanted to start tacking it all together using contact cement. So for starters, I go all around my trim with my wing divider so I can mark out exactly where I need to apply my cement. And with that marked out, I add barge adhesive all within those lines and to the back of the trim. Then carefully marry the two together after they've had a few moments to set up. Now I'm planning on putting it all together with like stitches and rivets, something a little bit more secure than just the contact adhesive. This is more just to tack it into place until I can. For the more complex tree design, I use that same trick of scratching the design in with my awl. Then I just colored in the design with my adhesive, so I knew exactly where to go and I didn't get any glue outside of my line. Then using a sacrificial piece of leather, I just hammered all around the piece to make sure it had a good strong bond. And of course I followed suit, just tacking all of my pockets into place as well. So with a lot of the aprons I've worn, especially like the thicker ones, I found them very restricting kind of by my legs. And since this is a heavier weight leather I'm using, I don't know if I mentioned it, but it's probably around 8 ounces, I was really worried about that constriction happening. So to get around that, I decided to cut a slit right where one of my legs would go. Now the thought is to add some snaps to that area so that I could have it closed if I need to, but I can open it up if I felt it was being restrictive at all. To make that work though, I need a piece to kind of overlap so the snaps have something to snap to. And that's where this little green strip of leather comes into place. Using it is not only going to give me a place to put my snaps, but is also going to hide that open edge. So the original thought was I was going to sew everything into place, all of the trim work, the tree, all of it. But then I remembered, I hate sewing. I hate it with a passion, the hand sewing. It's terrible. So I decided to rivet pretty much everything except for the pockets. Those I really do need the strength that stitching will apply. As a matter of fact, I'm not just going to stitch one row, I'm going to stitch two. You'll often find this in like jean material and stuff where it has these little double stitches just because it's so much stronger, right? And this being like a shop apron, I'm definitely gonna be like jamming a hammer in there, and I need it to be able to take a beating because I'm going to give it a beating. So with that in mind, I use my wing divider to drop in both lines. The first one about an 1/8 inch away from the edge, and the second one a 1/4 inch away from the edge. Now notice that first hole is falling just off of the pocket. By doing this, I'm gonna make sure that pocket isn't kind of pulling away from the rest of the apron, giving it like a weak stress point on those threads. After I've gone through and punched both rows of holes, I then go over everything with a waxed thread, performing a saddle stitch to hold everything in place. Now, normally with every stitch, I'm pulling it tight as I go. But with a material this kind of loose and drapey, you don't wanna do that because you're gonna cause it to start to ripple. Instead, I stitch a few in a row, and then I pull the threads in the direction the stitching is going. This is just gonna help keep that line nice and straight and stop it from deforming as we move. Once I reach the end and I've backstitched a few holes, I then send the needles up between the two pieces of leather so that I can tie off the thread and hide the knot. Finally, I wrap it all up by hammering the thread down flat. And okay, I know I say I hate stitching all the time, but this came out really good. I gotta, one of these. It looks really slick, the stitching came out nice and sleek. I really do like how stitching looks, just such a pain to do by hand. Leave down in the comment section below if you think I should get one of those like $100 stitchers from Amazon. I've read that like out of the box they're junk. You have to do a whole bunch of work to them, but once you have them dialed in, they're like, wow, they're perfect. Okay, so with all the rest of the trim though, I just went ahead and dropped in holes so I can put rivets into place. Way easier, and it's gonna hold everything together nice and strong. Also, on my corners where I'm gonna be attaching the straps to keep everything in place, I decided to punch in bigger holes so that I can drop in these grommets. These go on really easily with the correct anvil and striker and will help keep my apron from breaking in those high tension areas. Not only that, but they honestly look really slick. And though initially born of laziness, I really do dig the look of the rivets in this piece. They give it kind of an industrial, rough look, and it's what I'm going for anyways. I really like it. Finally, I throw in some of the snaps down in the leg slit area to pretty much complete this assembly portion. And check out how slick this thing looks. It fits me perfectly. It feels really like quality, like heavy. All of the pockets work nicely, and even this little leg slit works exactly how I wanted it to. I'm super excited with how it's coming out. Although, there is one niggling little issue for me. And it's purely aesthetic, but it looks too Fisher-Price right now, if that makes sense. Like it's just too clean looking. Again, I want this to belong to like an artificer who's a little rough around the edges and has been working for years. I almost want it to be like tattooed, right? Like either spells and stuff have been added to it to give it extra resistance, or ooh, maybe it's where he puts his like recipes and spells and stuff because he's too busy to write it down anywhere else, so he just kind of writes it on his apron. Like his apron takes the place of a wizard's spell book. Oh, that's so cool. So doing that took some figuring out, but I think you're gonna really dig what I came up with. Of course, it all started with me randomly messaging Minimalist Red being like, I need magical symbols, which of course she made, which is awesome. All of which I arranged and then cut out in adhesive vinyl on my Cricut cutter. After going through and weeding out all the material I didn't need, I was left with this really cool adhesive stencil for all of my arcane recipes and spells. The thought is to stick these in place and use them as stencils to airbrush leather dye. That being said, a lot of the designs have little floating pieces, right? That would be hard to reposition once I have everything on the leather. So to remedy this, I just bought some transfer paper, which is basically like a big roll of packing tape, which you go ahead and stick over your vinyl. And then when you peel off the adhesive backing, it all sticks to the tape, staying in position. Then finally, after you've stuck the vinyl where you need it, you can peel off that transfer tape and everything stays in place. In theory, so I heard. I've never done it before. So after I very carefully positioned my transfer tape and pushed it down to make sure it adhered nicely, I went ahead and cut all of my shapes out so I can place them where I wanted them. After arranging everything where I thought it would look cool on the apron, I removed the backing from the vinyl and stuck it where I needed it to go. Then finally, I carefully removed all of the transfer paper, leaving me with this perfect stencil. And this is one of those so far so good kind of things. Again, All of this is uncharted territory for me. I've never used transfer paper, and I've never tried to stencil something onto leather. Now, to stencil it, I'm using a thinned out USMC black dye in my airbrush. And before just going ahead and spraying everything, I surrounded the cutouts with some of this foam board just to protect from overspray. Then I slowly added layers of the dye into place, making sure it never pulled up too much because I didn't want it to wick underneath the stencil. And I also wanted to control the color. Again, I kind of want it to feel like a tattoo, and if you look at like tattoos, they kind of fade a little bit and they match into the skin tone, or in this case, the leather tone. And I just didn't want it to be too stark. Again, this was only an experiment and I had no idea if it was gonna bleed underneath the stencil or not, but upon removing the vinyl, I couldn't believe how clear this came out. It was absolutely perfect. In fact, all of the designs I put in place came out really crisp and clean. Even the ones with really small detailed designs looked like they were almost magically put into place. Or tattooed. They just couldn't be more perfect. I'm so happy with how this technique came out. All right, so now to wrap up the whole rest of the body of the apron, I went ahead and added the toppers of my pockets here, leaving little gaps in between the rivets so I had spaces to hang tools on. I also put my rag loop into place using this cool gear concho to hold everything together. The last thing from here I really needed to do for assembly is to make the actual straps that hold it all onto me. These were really simple to do though. I simply cut these 1-inch wide straps and connected these spring clips here to one side of each of them. Now 2 of these straps are gonna have like a belt buckle onto them, and the other side has the belt part with the holes in it. This way, using the 2 pieces, I'm gonna be able to adjust the size. Before I actually put the buckle end on though, I wanted a way to keep the straps from moving like independent of each other back there. Didn't want to like cutting into my neck as I work. To do that, I just cut this little X shape out of leather with holes for the strap to go through. This way, after everything's all dyed and tooled, all I had to do was pass the straps through these holes, which will hold everything into position. Then once they were into position, I just added my buckles onto the end. Now I simply connect the spring clips to my grommets, giving me straps to hold everything together. And that is the build. To wrap this whole thing up and add a layer of protection though, I decided to coat everything in some neat's foot oil. This stuff is often used for things that are gonna be outside like saddles, boots, baseball gloves, so I figured it'd be really good for this application since it's gonna get such rough use. Now I read to use it, you definitely wanna warm a little bit up first. Then just apply a little at a time with a rag, and a little goes a long way with this stuff. Now I was freaking out at first because of how dark it made everything. But don't freak out, this is super temporary and it totally mellows out within 24 hours. And BAM! Check that out! I am beyond proud with how this thing came out. To me, at least, it is a super badass artificer's apron and I love it. It fits perfectly, it falls on me nice, the weight feels good, my little leg slit here works. I can't wait to use this while forging or working with my grinder or just doing everything that usually just ends up with me destroying my clothes. I hope you enjoyed this project and this more kind of long form video format. It's great to be able to take the time to make things this thoroughly. Like this was a really kind of quality build and I'm very proud of it and I hope you enjoy it. Now before I wrap up, I want to say again, if you can and you don't mind checking out the new channels, I'd really appreciate the support. We worked real hard on these and it would be great to get your input on them. Oh, speaking of thanks for support, we have some new high-tier Patreon members I wanted to shout out. Hold on, because my memory's junk. I have it here. Jimmy Soups, Jaren Black, and Bear, thank you so much for your support. Seriously, it means the world to me that you support this channel, and it's only because of you and all the rest of the Patreon members that we're able to do any of this. Leather's expensive, yo, and so's all the other stuff we do. So again, thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. If you like what we do here and you'd like to support us, why don't you consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. And if you have ideas for the channel or you have some things you'd like to see us cover, why don't you leave that in the comments below and I will add it to the list here. All right, I should get going. Now that I have the ability to play with fire and not immediately be caught ablaze, I'm going to. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. Welcome to the end screen. May I interest you in a drink, an hors d'oeuvre, maybe one of these wonderful videos over here? Matter of fact, why don't you just go ahead and grab one of those right now while I prepare you a nice drink? Oh wait, I've got all night.